So again, this is a subject that I may have covered before, but I want to particularly reference a case that's been documented, and the subject is about violent women. And the case I want to document is an individual by the name of Jordan Worth, who physically and mentally abused her boyfriend, Alex, for 3 years. Now, everything I'm saying has been reported, so this isn't any sort of breach of privacy or anything like that. There was actually a video on BBC Three. Fair play to them for covering this because it's very important. Um, and I think it reiterates the point that we shouldn't assume that it's that much of a rarity. I mean, it's true we don't hear about it that much, but you have to consider why. There are a lot of things facing male victims. I mean, there's barriers facing female victims of domestic violence as well, but there are certain things facing male victims that female victims wouldn't necessarily have to go up against. I mean, both have the controlling aspect, but with female victims, if a woman has a black eye and she says her husband or boyfriend's abusing her, people will naturally believe that. There is a stigma still around men being abused by women because there's this notion that they're somehow weak men or they're pushovers. And I'll talk more about the specific case in a minute, but that's real. It's a way of thinking that we need to change, and it's other men are part of the problem. This sort of macho attitude that oh, if a woman hits you, you're a pushover. Personally, I wouldn't tolerate any girlfriend that treated me that way, but I've got no right to judge someone that's in that situation. And what's notable in this case, as indeed many cases, and it's the same with male perpetrators, they're very manipulative people. So this woman, Jordan Worth, was charming. She was loving in the sense of being caring and so on, according to the report. And so it's not like he met a horrible person. On the surface, she seemed like a nice person. And yet, for 3 years, she cut him. She poured boiling water on him. She she insulted him. She mentally abused him. And I can only imagine what that must have been like. Now, I think, like a lot of victims of domestic violence, in his case, he blamed himself, and he didn't. There was an officer, and huge credit to him. This was in Bedfordshire. I don't know which town, but um, Officer Ed Finn of Bedfordshire Police knocked on the door because there'd been reports of a disturbance between a man and a woman, and there'd been several call-outs apparently, and each time the girlfriend Jordan Worth and her family, because her family were complicit in this, they kept putting it down to him being a self-harmer. But this officer, to his huge credit, this is a good police officer. He had a feeling that something was wrong. So very diplomatically, he brought Alex upstairs and asked Jordan. He wasn't aggressive. He was very diplomatic about how he went about this. He asked Alex to come upstairs, and Alex wasn't going to say anything. So he then said he brought him to the police car just to talk. He turned off the radio to give Alex more confidence, and Alex opened up. If I can, I'll try and put a link to the video. And only with that did Alex finally open up and say, "Yeah, it's been her. She's been abusing me." Um, Jordan Worth. It's quite a historic case because Jordan Worth is the first woman to be convicted in the United Kingdom of domestic abuse. The first time. That's a disgrace because it is by no means the only time. It's good that it's finally happened, but it's a disgrace because there will definitely be other cases out there. Definitely. I mean, we rightly talk about domestic violence against women, and that is a huge problem. No question about it. You get examples of, we've heard, for example, about a football team losing. So some thug takes out his disappointment after a few cans too many on his long suffering wife or girlfriend. And I definitely think there are men out there who use sort of coercive techniques of control and bullying. It's definitely a huge problem. And as a man, as a human being, I'm disgusted by men who abuse their wives and girlfriends. I think it's the epitome of cowardice. But I also feel disgusted at women who think that they'll get away with it. And sadly, they're probably right because they're female. There are certain feminists also, frankly, and I made this point on my Facebook page, and two feminist contacts of mine got very uptight about it. I made the point that feminists are partly responsible for making it harder for male victims to come forward because they constantly put question marks on it. They say, oh, well, maybe she was defending herself. So there's excuses used for violent women that are not used for violent men. I mean, they might say, oh, she suffered violent men in the past, therefore that justifies her being violent towards this boyfriend. But under that logic, you could say, well, a violent husband or boyfriend had an abusive mother. There are no excuses for treating someone you supposedly love in that way. No excuses, whether you're male or female. And it is right. I hope this case sends out a message. Um, Unfortunately, the current Justice Secretary doesn't really believe in justice. I am not impressed by David Gauck. I think he's very weak. He's also publicly said he thinks that too many women go to jail, even though they form a very, very small minority of the overall prison population. I believe it's something like, I believe the overall prison population is 90,000, thereabouts. The female population is about 5,000, so it's a very small fraction of that. Violent women should not be spared jail. Absolutely not, despite what David Gauck would like. I hope he does leave the cabinet because I think he's a weak Justice Secretary. I'm not impressed by him at all. Um, but specifically on this issue, I just hope that police forces across the country, I hope police officers across the country take the approach of Officer Ed Finn. Huge credit to him because he may literally have saved this young man's life. I mean, when he was treated, they said he was 10 days away from death. 10 days away from death. And we hear about women being killed by violent partners, which is horrible, but it does happen to men as well. And it's very rare that I give the Sun newspaper credit, but I do remember they had a cover about this, and a man who had been, his violent female partner had put out cigarettes on him, had verbally abused him, all sorts of problems. And I think there's a stereotype that men in this situation must be pushovers. Well, I remember the man because I've got the newspaper, I collect newspapers. The man that they featured, he wasn't like a physically weak man. He was a big 6 foot guy, well built. He wasn't a pushover. But that's beside the point. I mean, a man in this situation is very unlikely to fight back because of the whole stigma around, oh, well, you don't hit girls. I do think anyone should have the right to defend themselves. So I think if a woman is coming at a man with a knife, he absolutely should have the right to physically restrain her. And I think society needs to be more honest about these things. I just think it's very sad that there are people out there who, and this isn't rare, it's not rare. Domestic violence is a very serious problem all over the world. But there does need to be stiff penalties. Where there is solid evidence, there needs to be stiff penalties for perpetrators, male and female. And I hope this case sends out the message that actually women are going to be, violent women are going to be, I hope it sets a precedent, put it that way, because I think there are too many. I think we don't even know how big the problem is because so many male victims probably won't come forward because they fear that they won't be believed, they fear that they'll be ridiculed. I mean, female victims also have that self blame thing, like, oh, it's my fault, I burnt the dinner or something, but at least they have one thing which is they will be believed. A woman with a black eye, if she says, my husband's hit me, very few people are going to doubt that. A man with a black eye, unfortunately, there are cops out there who will laugh or not take it seriously. Maybe they won't outright laugh, But there are cops out there who do have a bad attitude to these things. Officer Ed Finn doesn't. He is a good police officer, and credit to him. There needs to be more officers out there like him. Um, the police need to have a consistent attitude to these things. Um, of course, there needs to be solid evidence. You know, everyone deserves due process. There needs to be solid evidence, but it is a very serious problem, and violent women should not get off the hook.